What happens when a movie star known for his charm, humor, and easygoing smile suddenly finds himself cornered under studio lights with millions watching and nowhere to retreat? What happens when a conversation meant to entertain turns into a moment that feels more like a courtroom cross-examination? This is the moment that made viewers lean closer to their screens. The moment that split opinions across social media. The moment Chris Pratt's comic exterior cracked on live television. Before we go any further, if you love intense celebrity moments, dramatic interviews, and stories that pull you right into the room, subscribe to Stage View right now. Hit like and drop a comment. Your support keeps these stories coming. The studio of The View always looks warm from the outside. Bright lights, polished floors, a table that promises conversation, not conflict. But on this morning, there was something heavier in the air, something unspoken that lingered even before the cameras rolled. Producers whispered a little more urgently. Crew members checked microphones twice, and Chris Pratt, seated just off stage, adjusted his jacket with a subtle nervous habit he probably didn't even realize he had. He had done this countless times before. Late-night shows, morning interviews, red carpets. He knew the rhythm, the smiles, the jokes that landed just right. He knew how to be the guy everyone liked. Today was supposed to be no different. Promote the new film. Laugh about behind-the-scenes moments. Say something heartfelt about family. Smile for the camera. Easy. But Sunny Host sat at the table with her notes neatly stacked, her expression calm but focused. She wasn't smiling the way she usually did when greeting guests. Her eyes followed the empty chair where Chris would soon sit, not with excitement, but with intent. When the red light blinked on and the theme music faded, the applause erupted on cue. The audience clapped and cheered as Chris Pratt walked out, waving casually, flashing that familiar grin. He looked relaxed, confident, every inch the Hollywood star people expected to see. He shook hands, exchanged quick greetings, and took his seat, leaning back slightly, crossing one ankle over his knee. "Chris Pratt is here," one of the hosts announced brightly. Actor, producer, and star of one of the biggest films of the year. Chris laughed lightly. "That sounds way more impressive when you say it like that." The audience chuckled for a moment. Everything felt normal, safe. They talked about the movie first. Chris animatedly described early mornings on set, the exhaustion, the excitement. He joked about stunt mishaps and laughed at himself. And the audience responded exactly how they were supposed to. Applause here. Laughter there. Sunny listened quietly, nodding, occasionally glancing down at her notes. Then the conversation shifted. "So Chris," Sunny said, her voice measured, calm, almost gentle, "you've been very open about your values and your personal beliefs." Chris straightened slightly, just a fraction, barely noticeable, but it was there. "I try to be," he replied. "I think honesty matters." Sunny smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Some fans feel those beliefs have put you at odds with others in Hollywood. They say you've avoided addressing certain criticisms directly." The audience murmured softly. Chris let out a short breath, still smiling, but now it was tighter, more controlled. "I think," he said carefully, "there's a lot that gets said online that isn't always accurate." Sunny tilted her head. "But you understand why people ask questions, right? When public figures stay silent, that silence can feel like a statement." For the first time, Chris paused longer than usual before responding. The easy rhythm was gone. He uncrossed his leg, placing both feet firmly on the ground. "I don't think silence always means agreement," he said. "Sometimes it means you're choosing not to fuel something that's already loud." One of the other hosts jumped in quickly, sensing the tension. "Social media can definitely twist narratives." Chris nodded gratefully. "Exactly." But Sunny didn't move on. Still, she continued, her tone steady. "There are people who feel hurt. They feel dismissed, and they're watching right now." The studio felt quieter. Even the audience seemed unsure whether to clap or stay silent. Chris glanced briefly toward the crowd, then back to Sunny. The smile was gone now. What replaced it wasn't anger. Not yet. It was something closer to resolve. "I hear that," he said. "I really do. But I also think it's important to remember that no one owes the world every private thought they have." Sunny leaned forward slightly, resting her hands on the table. "But when you benefit from a public platform, doesn't that come with responsibility?" There it was, the question that shifted everything. Chris inhaled slowly. "Responsibility to who?" he asked, "and defined by whom?" A ripple went through the audience. Some nodded, others exchanged looks. Sunny didn't flinch. "To the people who support you. To the communities impacted by the things you choose not to address." Chris's jaw tightened. He could feel it now, the invisible pressure closing in from every angle. Cameras, audience, millions of viewers at home. This wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a line being drawn. I've always tried to be respectful, he said, his voice firmer. But respect doesn't mean I have to explain myself every time someone demands it. Sunny raised an eyebrow. Some would say accountability isn't a demand. It's a dialogue. Chris leaned forward now, mirroring her posture. And dialogue goes both ways, he replied. Not just one side deciding what the other owes. The applause came unexpectedly, louder than before. A few cheers broke out, but there were also murmurs of disagreement. The room was split and everyone could feel it. One host tried to lighten the mood with a joke, but it fell flat. The tension lingered, thick and unresolved. Chris glanced down at his hands for a moment, then back up. Look, he said, softer now, but no less intense. I'm a human being before I'm a headline. And sometimes defending your boundaries is the only way to stay grounded. Sunny held his gaze. And sometimes, she said quietly, those boundaries can look like walls. The silence that followed felt endless. Chris didn't respond right away. His eyes flicked toward the moderator, then back to Sunny. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a defensive edge that hadn't been there before. I don't build walls, he said. I protect my family, I protect my peace. That was the moment, the shift, the point of no return. The audience reaction was immediate, applause mixed with gasps. A few people shook their heads. Others leaned forward, hanging on every word. The hosts exchanged quick glances. This wasn't in the rundown. This wasn't scripted. This was real. And as the cameras kept rolling, one thing became clear. This interview was no longer about a movie. It was about identity, expectation, and the fragile line between public accountability and personal defense. Chris Pratt sat at that table. No longer the carefree star, but a man pushed into a corner he hadn't expected. And Sunny Host, calm and unwavering, wasn't backing down. The question now wasn't whether this moment would go viral. It was how much further it would go. And this was only the beginning. The silence didn't break on its own. It had to be pushed aside by someone pretending everything was still normal. So one of the hosts said with a strange smile, tapping her pen lightly against the table, "Your new film explores themes of resilience and identity, which actually connects to what we're talking about here." The attempt was gentle, almost desperate. Chris nodded once, grateful for the opening but still visibly tense. Sunny leaned back in her chair, arms folded loosely, her expression thoughtful, not confrontational, yet not retreating either. The moment had already crossed a line. There was no rewinding it now. Chris began answering, but his voice didn't carry the same playful energy as before. "Yeah," he said slowly. "The film's about finding who you are when the world keeps telling you who you should be." The irony hung in the air like smoke. Sunny glanced at him. "That's interesting," she said. "Because that pressure, that expectation is something a lot of people watching can relate to." Chris nodded again. "I know," but Sunny added gently but firmly. "They don't all have the privilege of stepping away from the conversation." The audience murmured. Chris shifted in his chair, his shoulders tightening. "I'm not stepping away," he said. "I'm choosing how I engage." Sunny's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in focus. "Choosing not to engage is still a choice," she replied. Chris exhaled through his nose. "And I'm allowed to make it," the moderator interjected quickly. "Let's remember this is about healthy dialogue." Chris glanced toward her, then back to Sunny. "I want healthy dialogue," he said. "But what I don't want is being told that if I don't speak in a certain way, I'm automatically wrong." Sunny leaned forward again. "No one's saying that," she replied. "What people are saying is that when you have influence, your silence can feel loud." Chris shook his head slightly. "That assumes intent," he said. "And intent matters." The audience clapped a little louder this time, but there were still dissenting sounds, scattered pockets of discomfort rippling through the room. Sunny's voice softened. "Chris, I believe you when you say you want peace, I really do. But peace for some can feel like exclusion to others." That landed harder than the rest. Chris looked down at the table, his fingers brushing the edge of a cue card that wasn't his. For a brief second, the cameras caught something raw, unguarded. Not frustration, not anger, vulnerability. "I didn't ask to be a symbol," he said quietly. "I didn't sign up to represent everyone's expectations." Sunny responded just as softly. "But that's part of what fame does." Chris looked up, his eyes steady now. "Then maybe fame needs to change," he said, "not people." The room reacted instantly. Applause surged louder and more divided than before. Some audience members stood halfway out of their seats clapping. Others sat stiffly, arms crossed, lips pressed tight. One host tried to laugh it off. "This is getting deep for a Wednesday morning." No one laughed. Chris glanced around, taking in the faces, the reactions. Look, he said, his voice rising slightly. I believe in kindness, I believe in respect. But I also believe that demanding explanations from people constantly doesn't build understanding. It builds resentment. Sunny met his gaze, and ignoring pain doesn't heal it. Chris leaned forward again, palms flat on the table now. I'm not ignoring pain, he said firmly. I'm saying I can't carry all of it. The cameras zoomed in subtly. Viewers at home could see the tension in his jaw, the slight tremor in his hands. Sunny paused before responding. Do you think, she asked carefully, that some of that defensiveness comes from feeling misunderstood? The word hung there, defensive. Chris let out a short, humorless laugh. Probably, he admitted. Anyone would feel that way if their character was constantly being questioned. Sunny nodded. That's fair. For the first time since the shift, the temperature dropped slightly. The audience relaxed just a bit. But Sunny continued, people questioning you aren't always attacking you. Chris straightened. Sometimes they are, he said, and we're pretending they're not. The applause returned sharper this time. A few audience members clapped loudly, emphatically. The moderator cleared her throat. Chris, do you feel like Hollywood has unfairly boxed you in? Chris didn't hesitate. Yes, he said. Absolutely. Sunny turned toward the moderator, then back to Chris. But Hollywood is also a place that amplifies voices, she said, including yours. And that amplification comes with strings, Chris replied. Invisible ones. Sunny raised an eyebrow. Like what? Like being told when to speak, how to speak, and when silence becomes guilt, Chris said. That's not amplification, that's control. A sharp intake of breath echoed from somewhere in the audience. Sunny sat back, considering him. Do you think, she asked, that control is always the intention? Chris shrugged. Intent doesn't change impact, he said, echoing her earlier words. The hosts exchanged looks. This was no longer just a debate. It was a mirror reflecting each argument back with sharper edges. Chris continued, his voice steady but charged. I don't want to be defensive, he said, but when I feel cornered, I will defend myself. Sunny nodded slowly. And when people feel unheard, she replied, they push harder. The room felt suspended, like everyone was holding the same breath. Chris glanced toward the audience again. I know people are watching this and picking sides, he said, but I hope they also see that this isn't about winning. Sunny followed his gaze. It's about listening, she said. Chris met her eyes. Then listen when I say I'm doing the best I can. The applause that followed was mixed, emotional, complicated, not celebratory, not condemning, just loud. The moderator finally stepped in with authority. We need to take a quick break. The theme music began to play slightly too loud, slightly too fast, as if trying to smother the tension instead of easing it. Cameras pulled back. The red light flickered off. Chris leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. Sunny looked down at her notes, her lips pressed together thoughtfully. No one spoke for a moment. Off camera, producers whispered urgently. A crew member gestured toward the hosts, asking if they were okay. The audience buzzed with hushed conversations, people leaning toward each other, replaying what they'd just witnessed. Chris stared straight ahead, his expression unreadable now. He had defended himself, but the cost was clear. This wasn't going to end when the cameras came back on, and everyone in that studio knew it. Because once a moment like this escapes into the world, it doesn't belong to the people who created it anymore. It belongs to everyone watching, and the storm was just beginning. When the cameras came back from break, the atmosphere in the studio felt fundamentally altered, like the air after a storm that hadn't fully passed. The applause lit up, and the audience clapped on instinct more than enthusiasm. Uncertain whether they were returning to a talk show or stepping back into a live debate that had already ignited something far bigger than the room itself. Chris Pratt sat straighter now, his hands folded, his expression carefully neutral. The charm had been dialed down, replaced by control. Sunny Host adjusted her chair slightly, her posture composed professional, but her eyes carried the weight of unfinished thoughts. This wasn't over, not even close. The moderator smiled for the camera. Welcome back. We're continuing our conversation with Chris Pratt. Her voice was smooth, practiced, but everyone could hear the tension underneath. Chris nodded politely. Thanks. Sunny turned toward him, her tone measured. Chris, before the break, you said something important. You said you feel cornered. Chris glanced at her. Yes, I want to understand that, Sunny said, because feeling cornered doesn't come out of nowhere. The audience quieted. This wasn't an attack, it was an invitation. And that made it more dangerous. Chris took a breath. When every action, every non-action becomes a headline, you stop feeling like a person, he said. You start feeling like a projection. Sunny listened closely. And that's exhausting, she acknowledged. It is, Chris replied, especially when people assume the worst about you without asking. Sunny nodded slowly. But sometimes people ask, she said, and they don't get answers. Chris's jaw tightened again because not every question is asked in good faith. The audience reacted immediately, some nodding, others shifting uncomfortably. Sunny leaned in slightly. How do you tell the difference? Chris paused. This time, the pause felt intentional. You can hear it, he said. In the tone, in the framing, in whether the goal is understanding or judgment. Sunny considered his words. And do you think, she asked, that your responses or lack of them have ever made that gap wider? Chris hesitated. For the first time, he didn't answer right away. The cameras lingered, capturing the internal struggle playing across his face. Maybe, he said finally. I'm not perfect. That admission rippled through the room. The audience responded with a soft wave of applause, quieter, more empathetic. Sunny's voice softened. Neither is anyone watching, she said. But when people feel dismissed by someone they admire, that hurt can turn into anger. Chris nodded slowly. I get that, he said. What I don't get is why that anger always has to land on me. Sunny met his eyes. Because you're visible. Chris let out a slow breath. That's not a crime. No, Sunny replied. But it is a responsibility. The word returned again, heavier this time. Chris leaned forward, elbows on the table. I take responsibility for my work, for my family, for the way I treat people in my life, he said. But I can't take responsibility for every interpretation of who I am. The audience reacted strongly. Applause broke out, followed by scattered boos. The divide was unmistakable now. One of the other hosts jumped in. Do you think the internet has made conversations like this harder? Chris answered instantly. Yes, because nuance doesn't trend. Sunny gave a small, knowing smile. That's true, but we're not on the internet right now. Chris continued. We're here face to face. And yet, Sunny said, millions are watching from behind screens. Chris glanced toward the camera as if suddenly aware of its presence again. Exactly, he said. Which means whatever I say here will be reduced, clipped, and weaponized. Sunny didn't deny it. That's the reality, she said. But avoiding the conversation doesn't change that reality. Chris's voice sharpened. Neither does forcing it. The audience inhaled as one. Sunny's expression remained calm, but her words carried weight. Do you feel forced right now? Chris met her gaze. I feel evaluated, he said. Not heard. Sunny paused. What would being heard look like to you? The question was sincere, and that sincerity shifted something. Chris leaned back slightly. Being heard would mean believing me when I say I'm trying, he said, not assuming malice where there is none. Sunny nodded. And believing others when they say they're hurt. Yes, Chris agreed. Both can be true. The applause this time was louder, more unified. A moment of fragile alignment, but it didn't last. Sunny straightened. Then help me understand this, she said. When criticism comes, why does your response feel defensive instead of open? Chris's eyes narrowed slightly. Because defense is what happens when you feel attacked. And some would say, Sunny replied, that openness is what disarms attacks. Chris shook his head. That's a nice idea, he said. But it doesn't always work that way. The moderator interjected again, sensing the rising tension. Chris, do you think this moment right now will change how you engage in the future? Chris looked around the table, then out at the audience, then finally back to Sunny. It already has, he said. Sunny tilted her head. How so? Chris's voice was steady, but there was an edge beneath it. It's reminded me that no matter how carefully I speak, some people will hear what they want. Sunny replied quietly. And it's reminded me that silence can sometimes sound louder than words. The audience reacted audibly, a mix of gasps and applause. Chris held her gaze. Then maybe we're both right, he said. The cameras caught Sunny's brief pause. Maybe we are, she conceded, but the tension didn't dissolve, it condensed. Because beneath the calm words and measured tones, something else was happening. Viewers at home were already clipping moments, choosing sides, crafting narratives. Twitter threads were forming. Headlines were being drafted. Chris Pratt wasn't just sitting at a table anymore. He was standing at the center of a cultural crossroads. And Sunny Host wasn't just asking questions. She was voicing a frustration shared by many. As the segment drew toward its end, the moderator smiled again too brightly. Thank you, Chris, for being here and for engaging in this conversation. Chris nodded. Thank you for having me. Sunny looked at him. I appreciate you staying in it, she said. Chris met her eyes. I appreciate you listening, he replied. The applause that followed was long, conflicted, and heavy because everyone in that room understood one thing. This wasn't over when the cameras stopped. It was only changing shape, and once it left the studio, it would become something none of them could control. When the cameras finally cut and the familiar theme music faded for the last time, the applause felt different. It wasn't polite. It wasn't automatic. It was uneven, emotionally charged, like the audience wasn't clapping for a guest anymore, but releasing something they'd been holding in for an hour. Chris Pratt stood, buttoning his jacket slowly. His smile returned, but it was thinner now, more professional than natural. He shook hands with the hosts, exchanging quiet words that microphones no longer caught. Sunny Host met his eyes one last time. There was no triumph there. No defeat either, just the shared understanding that something real had happened, and it couldn't be packed away with the cue cards. As Chris walked off stage, the energy followed him. Audience members whispered to one another, some nodding in approval, others shaking their heads in disbelief. A few pulled out their phones immediately, thumbs already moving, posting reactions before the studio lights had even cooled. Backstage, a producer leaned in close to Chris. "You okay?" they asked. Chris nodded, exhaling deeply. "Yeah," he said, "I think so." But his reflection in the mirror told a more complicated story. This wasn't the look of a man relieved it was over. It was the look of someone realizing it had only just begun. Sunny remained at the table for a moment after the segment wrapped, scanning her notes, then closing them with a quiet finality. One of the co-hosts leaned toward her. "That was intense," she whispered. Sunny nodded. "Necessary," she replied. Within minutes, the clips began to spread. Short videos hit social media, stripped of context and sharpened by captions that took sides immediately. One clip showed Chris saying, "I protect my family, I protect my peace." Another froze Sunny mid-sentence, her expression serious, the caption reading, "Accountability isn't an attack." S exploded. Chris Pratt trended worldwide within the hour. Some praised him for standing his ground, calling his responses calm, measured, and human. Finally, a celebrity who refuses to be bullied, one viral post read. Others accused him of deflection, of hiding behind vague language, of missing the point entirely. Defensive doesn't mean innocent. Another tweet shot back, racking up thousands of likes. Clips of audience reactions circulated too. Applause, gasps, crossed arms, nodding heads. Proof people said that the room itself had been divided. Entertainment blogs moved fast. Headlines followed within minutes. Chris Pratt gets defensive on The View. Sunny Host challenges Chris Pratt. Intense exchange. Viewers divided after heated daytime TV moment. Think pieces came next. Long threads analyzing tone, power, privilege, responsibility. Body language experts weighed in. Lip readers claimed hidden meanings. Everyone had an opinion and everyone was certain theirs was the right one. Chris's team released a short statement later that evening. It was careful, neutral, thankful. It spoke of open dialogue and respectful conversation without addressing specifics. To some, it felt appropriate. To others, it felt like more silence. Sunny addressed the moment the following day calmly and directly. "These conversations aren't about winning," she said. "They're about understanding, and discomfort is sometimes part of growth." Her words were quoted everywhere. Fans rewatched the interview in full, catching moments they'd missed the first time. The pauses, the glances, the shift in Chris's posture when the questions turned personal. The way Sunny never raised her voice, never backed down. Supporters on both sides felt validated. Critics on both sides felt confirmed. And in between them were millions of viewers who didn't know what to think. Only that the moment had stayed with them longer than any movie promotion ever could. Late that night, Chris sat alone, scrolling through reactions he told himself he wouldn't read. Praise, criticism, assumptions from people who had never met him. He put the phone down, staring out into the quiet, defensive. That word echoed again. Was he? Maybe. But he also knew something else was true. He had spoken honestly. And honesty, especially on live television, always comes with consequences. Sunny at home reflected too. She replayed the conversation not for validation, but for clarity. Had she pushed too hard? Not hard enough. She believed in asking difficult questions even when they made people uncomfortable. Especially then, the next week the moment was still alive. Podcasts dissected it. Panels debated it. Fans argued in comment sections that never seemed to end. Some demanded apologies. Others demanded apologies from the critics. And many simply asked the same question again and again. Where is the line between accountability and personal boundaries? That was the real aftermath. Not the headlines, not the clips, but the question left behind, hanging unanswered. Because the truth was, No one walked away untouched. Chris Pratt wasn't just a guest who promoted a film. He became a symbol of resistance to some, avoidance to others. Sunny Host wasn't just a host doing her job. She became a voice for viewers who felt unheard and a target for those who felt accused. And the audience, both in the studio and around the world, became part of the story. That's what moments like this do. They stop being entertainment and start becoming mirrors. Now it's your turn. Did Chris Pratt have the right to defend his boundaries, or did Sunny Host ask the questions that needed to be asked? Was this a necessary confrontation or a conversation that missed its own point? Let us know what you think in the comments. Share your perspective, because this debate doesn't end when the camera is cut. And if you want more explosive cinematic behind-the-scenes stories like this, subscribe to Stage View Right. Now, like the video, share it with someone who needs to see it, and stay with us for the moments everyone else is still arguing about. Because on Stage View, we don't just watch the moment,